everybody. I'm Alix Deal with our next superstar panel. This is how the oil world is in part in the middle of this energy transition and what the role of those companies are. So I want to welcome our all-star panel. I'm joined by His Excellency Saad bin Sherida al-Kaabi, Minister of State for Energy Affairs, the State of Qatar, and CEO of Qatar Petroleum. Also Shell's Beurden in Qatar, TotalEnergies Patrick Pouyanné in Paris, and Darren Woods of Exxon joining us from Houston. I want to jump right in. The news of the day is, will we see $100 oil? Analysts keep weighing in that we could. So you're the perfect panel to ask. Is it more likely that we see $50 or $100 oil? Let's start in Qatar. Ben, let's start with you.
Hello, Alex. I think we're probably going to see both $50 and $100 oil. Don't ask me which sequence, though.
Okay, fair enough. His Excellency, how about you?
I think with the discussion on energy transition and the lack of investment in oil and gas that's going on now for the last couple of years, there hasn't been enough investment in oil and gas projects. And if this continues, I think tied to the energy transition discussion, it could have a probability of going higher much more than lower.
Patrick?
Volatility, I would say. So quite a chance to reach 100, but we could see again in coming years some low prices. We have been accustomed to volatility. So I agree with His Excellency that there is a lack of investments because of the energy transition in the oil and gas industry.
Darren?
Yeah, I would agree with what the panelists all said. The coming out of the pandemic and the lack of investment in our industry, I think, is going to exacerbate the supply and demand tightness as the economies pick back up again. And then with time, we'll see supply pick up and rebalance. So we'll see both of those, but in the shorter term, probably higher prices.
And that's usually the thesis from analysts, is because the big oil energy guys like you guys are actually spending on different things and more capital discipline, that's going to affect the market and the ongoing supply, which is an easy way then to talk about how you allocate money. Because if you get to 100, there's tons of free cash flow that everyone's going to be throwing off. So I'll go kind of back around the circle. Darren, with that extra cash, how do you know where to allocate the most?
Well, Alex, I'd say we take a longer-term view. Can't get too enamored in the short-term markets, we all know, and we just lived through the pandemic where prices came down pretty sharply. They're now going to come back up high again, and I expect those to come back down again. So as we look at the industry and the forecast and our capital allocation, we do it for a long-term horizon, and we make sure the investments that we're making are robust to the price cycles, particularly the low end of the price cycle. And so I think you're going to see, certainly within Exxon Mobil, continued discipline in making sure that the projects that we're investing in are robust to the low price environment, irrespective of how high prices get here in the short term.
All right, fair enough. Patrick, TotalEnergies changed its name, so you're putting a lot of money behind things like wind and solar. With $100 oil, what does that do for you?
I think on oil and gas, obviously, like Darren, we plan on $50 per barrel. We plan on a low-cost break-even project. So my view is, and we give a lot of emphasis in our strategy to natural gas, in particular LNG. So no doubt we will continue on this strategy. We'll execute it. If we have more cash, first, because of volatility, I think we'll consolidate the balance sheet of the company. But then, as we have an ambition to become a very large, one of the top 5 renewable electricity producer by 2030, we'll allocate 20-25% of our capex to renewable energies and new energies.
Does that increase with more free cash flow or no?
Yeah, it's an increase because today this year we'll invest $3 billion, so it might reach $4 billion in the next years if we have more cash flow. So again, growing our ambition, but of course a profitable growth, which is what we are targeting in renewable electricity.
His Excellency, Your Excellency, Qatar is investing big in LNG. Huge, huge, huge growth potential. Does $100 oil make that easier or harder to do?
I think regardless of how high the oil prices, our investment is very clear. We see that gas is sort of tied at the hips with the transition discussion, and I think gas is part of the solution for a longer-term transition. And we see that the majority of our investment, of course, is going to go into gas, but we're also investing in renewables such as solar here in country and elsewhere. So we are part of the, I think, solution for the transition as gas and LNG in general, not only in Qatar, but worldwide. We have invited our colleagues here, all three colleagues are bidding to enter into the largest LNG development in the world that we've announced just recently for 32 million tons of LNG. The volume that we have really tendered for or brought in bids for, we have already received double the required equity as interest, and we have SPAs or sales and purchase agreements for offtakes that are also offered by colleagues and others that are double what we required. So the interest of LNG with carbon sequestration that we have is a unique opportunity to have a project that is very environmentally basically advanced, if you will, with carbon sequestration from the beginning. So we're doing it very responsibly, and we will be part of the solution for the long term.
So just to be clear, am I confirming that Shell, TotalEnergies, and Exxon are all bidding for a part of that LNG expansion?
Yeah, yes, they and others, and the bids are double what we requested, whether it's in SPAs or equity. So there's great interest, and I think it's a big part of it. But a big part of it is due to the carbon sequestration and gas being part of the solution for the future.
So Ben, you can circle this part of the conversation out in terms of, okay, the free cash flow, where are you going to be putting it? Clearly into Qatar and LNG, but where else?
Well, Alex, first of all, if indeed we do see a continued strengthening that we are seeing at the moment, I think our first priority remains indeed strengthening our balance sheet, returning more cash to our shareholders, and then at some point in time, indeed, also accelerating growth of the company. I would say, particularly in a high oil price environment, it shows that it's important to keep your oil business healthy because it will fund the entire strategy of the company. And that's our strategy, keep our oil business healthy for some time to come. But at the same time, have a very strong gas business, a stronger gas business than our oil business. And indeed, that is why we are also keen to participate with our partner, Qatar Petroleum, in the expansion here in Qatar. But then I would also say we want to put a disproportionate amount of money in what we call the future of energy. Ultimately, I think high oil prices, if they are going to arrive, may not continue to stay there. So we have to prepare for the future. And we will do that by investing, indeed, in power, in biofuels, in hydrogen, but also in nature, because these are the solutions that our customers need as they transition to a net zero world as well.
Let's stay on LNG then for just a moment. His Excellency, Bloomberg has reported that Qatar is selling gas cheaply to help lock in sales, which would then imply some competition risk from, say, Australia or US LNG. Can you talk to me a little bit about the pressure that you feel from supplies coming on in other major areas?
We are very disciplined in what we do regarding our marketing. We don't look at competition as competition. We look at how can we compete better with ourselves to be the lowest cost producer and then place volumes in the markets that are growing most. So what you have seen us do is growing in the market. Regarding pricing, we really don't discuss pricing per se, but in general, we go with the market and it's supply and demand. When there is ample supplies, prices do come down, and then when there is shortage, it comes up. What we don't like to see is what's happening with really the energy transition and a lot of short, if you will, or shortage of investment in LNG, which is a big part of the transition, where we think that there's going to be a big shortage in gas between the 2025, 2030 period. And that could cause, I think, a big spike in the gas market. And LNG market is not like oil. You saw the big spikes that happened earlier in the year. So I think we're placing volumes where we think they are needed, and we're working. And you're going to see us sign in the next few months more deals regarding prices. We go with the market, and whatever the market dictates is where we are.
It's a semi-similar question, Patrick, for you. I mean, you guys have some LNG projects, Papua New Guinea, Mozambique, and wanting them to remain competitive, but then at the same time, there's this huge expansion field in Qatar. Do you feel like there's room for all of it?
Yeah, I'm a strong believer that the energy transition is going with natural gas, in particular with LNG, as being having a big share. You know, the demand for LNG in the last 5 years have grown by almost 10%, driven by China and India. And even last year, in the mid of the economic and pandemic crisis, there were two energies we are growing. It was renewable electricity and LNG, plus 3%. So we believe that there is a strong attractiveness from LNG. And so we are quite aggressive in all our strategy, and we have positioned TotalEnergies fundamentally. All our growth will come from these two segments, renewable electricity and LNG. So I'm not afraid by having too much supply and demand. We know that we are in a commodity business. What is important is to invest in projects which can resist first quartile projects with lower costs. And the project you mentioned, either PNG or, of course, Qatar, it's why Qatar is, of course, an high interest, or Arctic LNG as well, where we invest in Russia or in some projects in the US have these characteristics. So no doubt, and we are not afraid to see imbalances in the market. On the contrary, last year, there were some projects which were, I would say, delayed. And it gives room to continue to have a strong ambition in LNG for the next coming years.
So, Darren, you've just had to spend a lot of time talking to shareholders recently. How do they feel about LNG? I feel like a few years ago, it was definitely going to be the bridge fuel. Then it was going to be the permanent fuel. But now it feels like in some shareholder circles, it's become more of like a dirty, non-green word. What has been your conversations, Darren, on that respect?
I think, you know, if you look at credible third-party analysis, a variety of them that are out there, including the IPCC, the IEA, all recognize the important role that gas is going to play in economies well into the future. And it goes back to critical sectors of our economy, industrial sectors, power generation sectors, that as economies grow, as the demand for electricity grows, and the products that support modern life and the industrial processes that make those products, the need for energy in those sectors is going to grow. And today we don't have good low carbon solutions. And so I know Exxon Mobil and many of the other panelists here are working on those technologies to help address that. But certainly gas is going to play a really important role. And I think that's broadly recognized. The challenge then is with using gas, how do you address the emissions associated with that use? And His Excellency mentioned carbon capture and storage. We think that's one technology which will help address what we refer to as this dual challenge, which is one, providing affordable and reliable energy, while at the same time addressing the challenges of the emissions.
Perfect setup. This leads me into the poll for the session, which gets at just this issue. So the poll question is, which of these should be the priority for the energy transition? One, A, divesting of oil and gas interests. B, investing more in renewable and low carbon technologies. C, increase investment in greener energy sources. Or D, do more carbon sequestration. And I bet that all of you would say all of the above. But I'm very interested to see what the poll shows, if we can just get that up there. And in real time, we'll be able to see what people think. And this is really pivotal to all the oil companies, oil countries' strategies. Oh, wow. Wow. Okay. I don't think I've ever seen a poll with 100%. But it looks like that's investing in renewable and low. Did one person vote? Come on, guys. Okay, there we go. So the majority investing in more renewable and low carbon technologies, some divesting of oil and natural gas interests. Okay, increasing money into greener energy sources. Oh, that makes me feel a little better. I was gonna be like, one person voted and it was all about green energy. So let's use this as the basis for the next part of the discussion. And Ben, I'm actually gonna go to you first on this because Bloomberg is reporting that you're shopping around your Permian assets. Some think that you should get rid of oil and gas assets and sell them off. Can you talk to me about it?
Yeah, thanks, Alix. If you don't mind, I won't comment on market rumors. We simply never do that. I was looking at that poll and I thought, interesting. So here we have almost 100% of the measures that are being polled supply-side measures. Whereas the reality, of course, is that the supply side is not going to drive the energy transition. The energy transition is going to be driven from the demand side. So I can say, sure, we will probably be ending up doing a mix of the four things being suggested here. But the more important part is that ultimately our customers will have to make the energy transition. They will have to start using different types of energy, different type of technologies, different type of mitigation techniques, perhaps, so CCS indeed, in order to make that energy transition happen. A lot of people look at us and say, well, look at your emissions. And then I mean our scope 1, our 2, and 3 emissions. But our scope 3 emissions are 93% of our total emissions. That's the scope 1 emissions of our customers. So if we are going to tackle that energy transition, we have to start working with our customers how they will use different types of products that we may then indeed supply. And for my company, which supplies 4 times as much as it produces itself, the challenge therefore is how to work with our customers to make them successful in their energy transition. And that is what I believe is going to be needed and what policies should be focused on. This whole idea that if you would just curtail supply, the world has no choice but to go for an energy transition, I think defeats any logic that I've come across.
So that seems like then the Permian is still important.
Of course, the Permian is an important asset for I think the world. I mean, bear in mind, we are, if you look at the current supply sources of oil and gas, we are looking at decline rates in supply that seriously outpace any demand shrinkage that the world would need to follow in order to get to 1.5 degrees. So the whole idea that you would just get rid of supply and that would sort of teach the world a lesson on how to do the energy transition, I think is a fallacy, to be perfectly honest.
The other part of that poll, and His Excellency, this will be for you, was also about decarbonization. And I wonder if you could talk me through some of the work you guys are doing to decarbonize LNG.
We started a very long time ago in decarbonizing LNG, and we have currently, as we speak, we've started CO2 sequestration a few years ago. As we speak, we're sequestering, capturing and sequestering 2 million tons a day of CO2. And with the plan for the North Field expansion, as we have announced in the past, by 2030, we'll reach around 9 million tons of CO2 that will be sequestered. If I can just elaborate on that point regarding the transition and really the demand side, we need to also remember we're not talking about really developed nations only and the richer nations that can afford to do some of the things that they can do. We have about 800 million to 1 billion people that are deprived of the basic need of electricities and basic fuels. So I think when we talk about transition, we also need to be cognizant of the fact that we're harming a lot of people by really not giving them enough supply of basic needs that they may have, and they may not be able to afford some of the things that we're talking about in the transition. So transition is a word that's used that needs time, I think, to develop. We need to be very responsible, very deliberate, and I think do it responsibly. But also we need to collectively do it as humanity and not be unfair in how we do it.
And that sort of echoes what Ben was saying about customer-driven side of things. So also, obviously, what came out right away was investing more in renewables. Patrick, TotalEnergies, when you changed your name, you're doing just that. Can you talk to me now that you've been at it for a while? How are these returns in these renewable assets? Can you talk us through that?
Yeah, of course. But before, I just would like to comment the poll, because there is an very interesting lesson for me, is that the first item about divesting oil and gas was less appealing to the answers. And I think it's interesting because the whole question of energy transition is, in fact, more for our companies to allocate part. We need oil and gas to allocate part of the cash to greener energies, to renewables, and to make the transition real. So about profitability, I repeat what I said several times. All the projects in which we invest have a target to deliver at least 10% of return on equity, in renewables in particular. You can do it today if you consider the projects that you use, of course, the low interest rate and to leverage the projects. And also, if you take benefit from the fact that there is a huge attractiveness for many investors in green assets and renewable assets. And so all the assets we are developing, we have a plan to divest 50% of them. And with this business model, we reach 10% return of equity. So, I mean, we bear the investments during the development because we have the capacity to do it. But then we will offer half of the projects to other investors. So this debate about renewable profitability is interesting, but I would also remind that renewable business models are very different from oil and gas. It's not commodity pricing today. We bet on PPAs with 10, 15 years of stable revenues, which of course offer a different risk profile compared to the investment we do in oil and gas. So for TotalEnergies, we really think that the combination of maintaining a strong foot in oil and gas with its volatility, but also developing and preparing the future, growing our renewable electricity arm is a good way to prepare and to ensure, I would say, the perennity of the company.
A quick follow on that, Patrick. Are you noticing, though, there's more money in those assets right now? Are you having to pay up for some of the renewable assets that you want?
No, we keep the discipline even on that. There is a huge amount of opportunity around the planet. You don't need to buy existing assets, developed assets. You can perfectly concentrate, like we do in oil and gas, of adding access, I would say, to early stage developers. And this is not expensive. You can do it. There are a lot of opportunities. Of course, if you rush to the most mature markets, which are today Europe, the US, and Middle East, I would say in somewhere, and if you participate to tenders, of course, it's quite like in oil and gas, there is no much difference. You know, tenders do not deliver the best returns. But if you are smart and you are able to create your own opportunities, there is a lot of opportunities around the planet to find very good returns, I can assure you.
So this all brings up the question that I run into a lot as a reporter is how quickly should companies move and how quickly should they transition, not just how they do it, but how fast they should. And Darren, and that's an opening for you. So there's obviously a big shift on the board with Exxon, Engine 1 getting 3 seats on that board. And I wondered if you could give some perspective on, have you met, what it's like? Is there, on the whole board, openings for a real strategic shift and how quickly? Can you just talk us through some of the language right now and some of the stuff that you're hearing?
Sure, and I've talked to all the new board members, and I think they all understand and recognize the dual challenge, the role that we play in that challenge, not only in working towards transitioning to a lower carbon future, but at the same time meeting the demands that many of the panelists today have talked about, this desire or need for affordable, reliable energy. And so that conversation continues to happen. And I think there's been general alignment is that our company, with the foundation that we've built over decades in technology, can play an important role in both sides of that dual challenge. With respect to emission reductions, obviously the pace that you can go is a function of the businesses that you're in, the technologies that are available to address the emissions from those businesses, and as Ben's pointed out, your customers and the demand for the energy that your customers or the products that you produce at your customers, all those things come together, and government policy. And so this is not a unilateral process. There's a multitude of stakeholders, and it's going to require collaboration across all of those stakeholders, across all those entities to drive this reduction. ExxonMobil has been very focused on our own emissions and reducing those emissions as we've gone through time. If you look at the progress we've made since 2016, when the Paris Agreement was formed in 2020, we were down 11% in our emissions from 2016. That's far in advance of the OECD countries' reductions and far in advance of the commitments made as part of the Paris Agreement. So we're making good progress in that space, and we'll continue to do that. But ultimately, the businesses that we're in, the products that we supply, and the operations that are required to supply those products are going to be a function of what the world and society needs from companies like myself and the other panelists here.
Yeah, and that is going to bring us to the role of government and such, which we'll get to in just a second. I just wanted to then end with this part of the conversation with Ben, because you also got some pressure losing that court ruling to cut emissions now by 45% by 2030. You recently wrote in a LinkedIn post that Shell would accelerate those plans to reduce emissions. Do you have any clarity yet on how fast you can go and what kind of plans you're going to be looking at now?
Well, of course, we are working through the details of it, but let me say the court order that we got in the district court in The Hague to reduce our emissions is twofold. First of all, reducing our own emissions, our Scope 1 emissions, by 45% compared to 2019. And I think probably with some work, we can see a pathway to doing that. And we are up for that challenge. It is a challenge that we had set ourselves anyway. The second challenge, to reduce the emissions of our customers by 45%, is a different story. First of all, we don't have a performance obligation. We have a best endeavors obligation. And of course, that's also very much in line with our strategy. Our strategy is to purposefully and profitably decarbonize our customers. And that is what we will be doing. Can we get to 45%? Well, let's see. But again, the point that I'm trying to make is the challenge with reducing the emissions of our products, so the emissions of our customers, should not be a challenge of how quickly can we get rid of our customers. It should be a challenge of how quickly can we work with our customers to change their energy needs in lower carbon energy needs. Mm-hmm. And again, some of that may be technology dependent. Some of that may be driven by our business models. Some of that may be driven by our innovation. But for a large part, that is also going to be driven by the policies of governments that these customers work under. We can only reduce in any one country, say, the emissions from the petrol that we sell if we have a significant shift from petrol engines to electric vehicles. That is not something that we can drive. We can, of course, ever more target that particular segment of our customer population. But if that's only 0.1% or 2% or whatever in the market that you operate, you only can shrink in order to meet that particular objective. So yes, we're up for that challenge. We will do as much as we can. We will work very hard with governments, with customers, and of course with our own technologies to get as far as we can. That's the challenge that I'm embracing. But at the same time, I'm also calling out to governments to also step up to the plate, because this is not a challenge for one company, not even for one sector. This is a systems challenge that we all have to embrace.
So, His Excellency, you sit right there on policy and then also as a CEO of Qatar Petroleum. What needs to happen on the government side?
I think all governments are already taking action regarding the energy transition. What has to happen, I think, is we cannot, overpromise and underdeliver in any sector. I mean, whether it's oil and gas or other sectors, we need to put realistic targets. And geographically, it will change from country to country. So some countries will have more capacity to do renewable. I mean, as an example, if you're a country like Qatar, we're already embarking on doing a lot of solar here in Qatar because we have a lot of sun, but we don't have wind. So other countries will be more into wind. You have battery challenges or storage and battery challenges that will need to be worked out, and technology will need to be improved. So I think from a legislative part and from governments, it depends on each government and where they are as a baseline and where they want to go. I think the majority of governments are taking this very seriously, but it has to be an integrated solution where it's the supplier and the customer or the end user that have to all work together. Countries will have to put the policies in place to help do that. But there is also another challenge, which is the bill that will have to be paid to bridge that gap. And that bill, is it put up by customers, by governments as subsidies, or is it, definitely there has to be a shared burden. And I think not all countries will afford to do that.
I completely agree. And then I wonder, His Excellency, where that leaves things like a carbon price or a carbon border tax that Europe is sort of looking into. What's the role of that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think if there is a unified carbon credit and carbon pricing that's available, I think for somebody like us that wants to bring ample supplies of gas into the market to help with the transition, when we have carbon sequestration and that we're doing that costs us somewhere in the range of $300 million to do, that we're actually not getting any gain from. I think if you actually can have carbon trading and some mechanism that's very defined and clear, and where you have a mechanism where it can be traded at prices that are fair and equitable to what you want to achieve, I think then you'll have a lot more people going into sequestration, and it will make sense for a lot of projects that won't make sense without it from an environmental perspective and from a financial perspective. So I think we all have to collectively work together to make sure that we have a carbon mechanism that can be traded, can be priced, that can be fair for all countries.
I'm actually going to jump over you, Patrick, for a second.
If I may comment on this one, because
sure.
Sorry. Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, you talk about carbon pricing and carbon border adjustment mechanisms, etc. And I fully agree with His Excellency. Carbon price is going to be very important, and it will enable all sorts of things that are currently out of the money. So a carbon price is absolutely essential, but it's also absolutely insufficient. We should not think of a carbon price as a panacea for the energy transition. It will help rational actors like industrial players and suppliers make different choices, but ultimately, people are not going to change their car because there's a price on carbon. People are not going to change the airline behavior because there's a price on carbon. People are going to not change their house because there's a price on carbon. That is only going to happen if we put certain mandates in place. So in addition to having carbon pricing to influence rational economic actors, we also have to have policy and regulation that mandates things that are not going to be moved by just carbon pricing. And I think that is quite often overlooked, because the amount of the economy that we are going to move by putting a carbon price in place may be significant, but it's less than 50%. The other part needs to be done by smart mandates, smart policy, smart regulation.
So then let me jump to Darren, because Darren, you have proposed an enormous carbon sequestration project on the Gulf Coast that definitely needs support elsewhere. So talk to me about the role of policy.
Well, I agree with the points that Ben and His Excellency have made, and policy is going to play a very important role. If you look at where carbon emissions have occurred to date, they've occurred in sectors where you can sell into existing markets and realize return from the products you make. When you move more broadly and try to address economy-wide emissions, there is no market today for reducing CO2, and therefore no incentives or no price incentives, no mechanisms to drive that. So you can achieve that through a carbon tax, or you can achieve, or a price on carbon, or you can achieve that through regulations and policies that ultimately have a price, but not quite as explicit. But there needs to be some mechanism to drive that reduction. What we tabled in the Gulf Coast here in Houston was a very large-scale project and proposal to reduce emissions from an industrial corridor in the Houston Ship Channel that has the potential to reduce 100 million tons per annum by 2040. And that's collecting the emissions across a wide band of industrial sites along the Houston Ship Channel. That does need a higher price on carbon, a higher government incentive on carbon, because we're moving to more and more dilute CO2 streams. The more dilute the stream, the more expensive the concentration and the storage. That project has lots of advantages. And if you look at the cost required to capture and store that economically, we estimate it's about $100 a ton for every ton of CO2 that's removed from the atmosphere. That is much less expensive than some of the current policies that the U.S. government is pursuing. And so with the administration coming into office and pushing for more rapid decarbonization, we thought it was important to make sure that we had options on the table for the government to consider, and as they drive towards lower emissions, to find options that are lower in cost and have the potential for large-scale reductions, so that the government's effectively allocating scarce resources to get the biggest bang for the buck.
All right, I got 30 seconds. Patrick, you want in on this question?
I want to ask a question to.
You want to ask a question?
I didn't hear. Sorry.
Oh, I said, did you have any comment on sort of a carbon tax, carbon price, the role of government?
No, I think everything has been said perfectly by Ben, Darren, and His Excellency. I think carbon pricing is important, but innovation as well, and policies are also very important. So it's a collective effort. It's not only unilateral efforts. It's for governments, customers, companies, investors, all together if you want to make the transition a success.
Thank you so much, everyone. I could do another half hour, but they're going to kick us out. So His Excellency, thank you. Patrick, Darren, and Ben, thank you all very much. It was a sincere pleasure.